The next session is sponsored by Motor City Casino Hotel. Please welcome the Mayor of the City of Detroit, Mike Duggan, joined by the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of 1642 Ventures, Dennis Archer Jr.
Good afternoon.
Good to see you.
I guess Happy New Year. I'm not sure when you stopped saying Happy New Year, but it's the 10th, so it's still the first third of the month, so we'll go with Happy New Year. Let's take a tour of the city, and we're going to end up back in downtown Detroit because that's what we're here to discuss. But let's go into the neighborhoods first. A lot has always been said about the focus of development being downtown. You have been very intentional, definitely in your second term, and you are now, as it relates to making sure there's development in the neighborhoods, that there's retail and services and opportunities for those that live in the outskirts of the city. Is that still part of your agenda? How's it going?
Well, you remember I'd been here probably 2 or 3 years, and a developer came in to see me, and he was really angry. He says, there's no steals left in downtown and midtown. And this is the way a lot of folks see Detroit. It's downtown, midtown, and the neighborhoods, as if they're all the same. And I said, really? Well, I think there's opportunities on Jefferson or Jefferson Chalmers. I think there's opportunities on Livernois. I think there's opportunities on Grand River, on McNichols. And the guy looked at me like he was crazy, and he went back and he left town. But if you look at what's happening today on Livernois, where you can't get a parking space on a Friday night, you look at McNichols, where we put in the streetscape, and now the plywood has been pulled off of almost every one of those vacant storefronts and buildings going in. And if you haven't seen what's happening on East Warren, which will be completed this year, it was a neighborhood my family grew up in where you had a vibrant commercial district. It is exciting to be doing Dexter, to be doing West Warren, to be doing Rosa Parks, to be doing Kirchville. And so we are seeing vibrant commercial districts. We're seeing vacant apartment buildings renovated, and it's exciting to have opportunities not just in this area, but of course, I never thought I'd see the kind of development we're seeing downtown.
I think that the neighborhood development broadens the number of entrepreneurs and developers and smaller contractors who maybe yet aren't able to play downtown. It gives them a chance to get into business out in the neighborhoods, and then eventually they can move downtown and move to larger projects. So it seems like it's a very fertile environment for that sort of development. You know,
between Motor City Match and Invest Detroit and all the things that we have done, it has been exciting to watch these entrepreneurs get successful, open a second site, open a third site, and in some cases find their way into Midtown and downtown. But I go to every single new business opening. I just love it. To listen to somebody's story about, I drove by this building, I cut hair for 20 years and thought I could own my own shop, and I drove by this boarded up building, and today it's open, it's beautiful, I'm my own boss. Probably once or twice a week I get to do that. There's nothing more enjoyable about this job.
All right, so if we leave the neighborhoods for a second, we go down to the riverfront. Lots of amazing things happening, not only along the riverfront, but now coming off verticals off of the riverfront.
You know, people of the city will never be able to thank enough the folks in the Riverfront Conservancy, the folks at General Motors and DTE and the Gilbert Group. I shouldn't start naming all the partners, the foundations that made it possible. But growing up in Detroit, I didn't know we had a river. I mean, it was all industrial buildings, cement silos. You couldn't get to it. And now, we all know USA Today 2 years in a row has voted it the best, but you haven't even seen the Ralph Wilson Park that the Wilson Foundation is building south of the post office. Is going to be the most spectacular park. And then you're right, we're extending the DeQuinder Cut farther north with the Joe Louis Greenway, and Christmas Eve, the legislature passed the convention center legislation, which is going to pave the way not just for a bigger convention center and I think a world-class convention hotel, but 2nd Avenue is going to come north off the river into another connection into downtown. Of course, we have another one going over to the the train station. And so it is very exciting. I just remember the years I go to Chicago, I was so envious of their riverfront, saying,
Right.
why did Detroit never have this? And now I go down and look, and I'm just so appreciative. Probably a lot of people in this room had a lot to do with it. But it's changed the city.
Let's talk about the evolution of development downtown, starting with maybe go back 10 years ago, where there were a lot of repositioning and rehabilitations of vacant buildings.
Well, you know, my perspective, it goes back farther than that. I was working in a downtown law firm in the 1980s. And I remember the day that the David Whitney building closed, how sad I was. The David Stott building closed, how sad I was. The Book building closed. It was like NBD moved out. I mean, it was just like one heartbreak after another. And then, of course, there was a fellow by the name of Mayor Archer who got Pete Carmanis to bring CompuWare down, and there was like a little bit of a pulse. But even then, you were going past a lot of vacant buildings. You came down to Detroit 12, 13 years ago on a Saturday morning, there was nobody.
Right.
I mean, literally nobody downtown. And now to see what we have nights and weekends, we went from certainly Dan Gilbert, who did such a remarkable thing, filling up those buildings, and folks like the Roxbury Group, who filled up a couple of buildings, and some others who had done it. And now we've hit the point where there's cranes.
Right.
And,
looks amazing.
and you got, and Stephen Ross, the biggest developer in the country. If you haven't seen Hudson Yards, it is, you can't even imagine somebody thinks that big. He's here in Detroit saying, I'm going to build 10 buildings with $1.5 billion and 1 million square feet. These are the kinds of conversations that have gone on in Chicago and LA, but been a long time since they've gone on in Detroit.
You know, we have talked throughout the presentation today. Antoine, earlier in his remarks, talked about downtown being for all, and throughout the morning and afternoon, people have used the word intentionality pretty frequently. And there's something that's been announced today that I don't want to steal the thunder, that speaks exactly to intentionality on behalf of the administration and the policymakers around development downtown, as well as inclusiveness. Do you want to?
Yeah, I do. And I think about intentionality. I think about, I was at the DMC about 15 years ago, and Dan Gilbert called me and says, I want you to come to this event I'm having on placemaking. And I had never heard the term before. I said, what's placemaking? He says, placemaking is where you actually plan out where you're going to work and live and what the environment's going to be like. I said, why isn't that the government's job? And Dan says, really? We're going to do it. And so I went, and he started thinking about how these things would fit together. You think about Campus Martius. When I got here, we thought about being intentional. And it was really the first sign somebody had in my mind of saying, let's intentionally change what we had. We had 2 buildings on Washington Boulevard that had 165 seniors downtown that were in subsidized affordable housing. The federal tax credits, which last 30 years, were running out. And pretty much any other city in America, the owner of the buildings would have kicked the tenants out when the contracts were up, taken them to market rate, and made a big profit. We said, this isn't going to happen in Detroit. We got these seniors who have been here through the downturn. We're not going to say to them, now that we're coming back, there's no room for you. And in that case, it was Roxbury Group. We made a deal. We extended the houses, got the apartments renovated. All 165 families stayed for another 30 years. We said, that's intentional. That's saying what we're going to do. Now we're about to cross a threshold that we've never done. And with Stephen Ross's deal, he's going to build about 650 apartment units as part of District Detroit. And we said, all right, we want to have 20% of those be affordable. We don't just want to preserve the affordable housing. We want to build it, which means 140 units. And let me tell you what that means. For a 1-bedroom apartment, in something that he would be building, your rent would be $2,400 a month. I mean, that's pretty much the standard rate. Well, for somebody who makes half of the area's median income, $30,000, it would take their entire salary to pay for that rent, which means you're going to create a bastion of wealthy folks in one area, and it'll be, as far as I'm concerned, economically segregated, if not racially segregated. So we stepped in and said, with the DDA, and they just got great leadership over there, I think they'll make the final decision tomorrow. I said, the DDA, since Coleman Young established it in 1975, has captured the tax dollars downtown and put them into economic development downtown. What we are doing now is taking $24 million of that downtown tax capture and saying, we're going to build the kind of units we want. We're going to have 140 of them built into these beautiful structures, but we're going to subsidize them, so your rent's not going to be $2,400 a month, it's going to be $840 a month. And they're going to be on the same floors with the same finishes as everybody else, because I believe Detroit is a place where the doctor who works at Henry Ford Hospital should be able to be in the same neighborhood as the Henry Ford hospital workers working in the cafeteria or pushing the wheelchairs. That's what a city is about, is people of different incomes and different backgrounds living together. And so you're seeing something brand new, a $24 million investment in making sure that as this new vision gets built, that we are not just keeping the folks here who stayed here, we are building a city where people of all incomes are welcome in all neighborhoods.
I think what's important to note about this announcement that will be formalized tomorrow is that this is not just for large developers. It's not just for the Illich family, the Ross family, the Gilberts. I think there's a minimum threshold of 10 units, and you can get up to $200,000 in the low interest loans for those 10 units. So for folks like Larry Brinker Jr. and Chris Jackson, who we had on the panel earlier, who are smaller developers, they can also partake in this fund.
Absolutely, and those loans are forgivable if you keep renting them out to people of low income. You end up not repaying them. And Donald Rencher, who does just such a phenomenal job in our housing, as our housing director, I sat with him today, and there's going to be 11 more major affordable housing apartment projects in the city that will be spread through downtown, midtown, and throughout the city. And it's a really exciting time, because for homeowners in this city, property values have basically tripled in the last 10 years. If you're a homeowner in Detroit, your wealth grew significantly. If you were renting in that same neighborhood, your rent went up quite a bit. And that requires us, if we're going to have a place for everybody in the city, to keep building more and more affordable housing. And so I drive through the city right now with vacant apartment buildings and saying, okay, how much do we have to put in to subsidize this to get this vacant apartment building renovated and move families in here? And it's really been, one apartment building after another. We're just going to keep going.
Charity talked previously about there being a wealth gap. Throughout the morning, we talked about issues in regards to inclusion and being intentional about it. Talk about what the administration has done over the years and what you will continue to do to ensure that folks from all walks of life are able to participate as developers, not just in downtown, but throughout the city.
Well, this will be way off of downtown, but this will give you an example of when Charity talks about wealth gap and the institutional barriers. They aren't just in the 50s and 60s. I want to talk to you a little bit, you could talk about this, about what happened in the marijuana businesses. So the voters of this state legalized medical marijuana. 75 marijuana shops opened up in Detroit, places where they were appropriately zoned, not next to schools or churches or parks. 75 opened up. 71 opened by non-Detroiters, 4 opened by Detroiters. And the number of African Americans was probably 5 or 6. And so you could say, okay, that's a fair market, right? People got there in their own. We're talking about the last 10 years. So then the group of marijuana operators goes to the ballot to get recreational marijuana legalized, and the voters approve it. But they wrote in a provision. For the first 3 years, the only people who could get a recreational marijuana license were existing medical marijuana store owners, which meant that forever you would lock in an industry in Detroit that would be owned basically 95% from residents outside of this community. And people in the city support the ability to buy legal marijuana, but what are you going to do? And so Councilman James Tate took the lead on this. We took a lot of grief, but I stayed with him, and we said, as long as the rule is in place that only medical marijuana owners can get it, we ain't licensing any in Detroit. I took a lot of grief for that. James Tate took more than I did. When that 3-year period ran out, we went out and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. 50% will be through the social equity, that you have a history in the city. 50% will be from folks who don't have a social equity. Federal judge threw us out, said you can't create a geographic barrier. So we got a little bit smarter, and we said, okay, 50% come from cities with high poverty rate, which it turns out you can do legally, as a federal judge ruled. We just issued the first 33. 25 of them were won by Detroiters. The amount of intentionality it took. I want people from outside the city to invest. You're welcome to come here. You're welcome to open businesses. But Detroiters have to have their fair share, not just of the jobs, but of the ownership. And this is what we do every single day. And you say, how could this possibly happen in Detroit in 2020? But it had not been for James Tate and the council that said no, we would have had, I think, yet another case where the African American community was locked out of entrepreneurship. So, you know, you can talk about what you've done in Paradise Valley. One of the first things we did was take an area that was an area wiped out by 375 in the 1960s, and take a group of buildings that the city owned and said, we're going to develop them together with an African American theme and recognize the heritage. And I'm glad that you were one of the successful ones, but you ought to talk. Me too. Yeah, you ought to talk about what has happened over there.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So now you're the interviewer, I'm the interviewee. Yeah. But it's very, so in 2015, the city put out an RFP for 7 pieces of property in Harmony Park. And I put together a team, all African-American team, to put a bid to acquire 2 of the buildings. So we were notified in 2016 that we won our bid. And, you know, we were jointly part of a couple lawsuits, so it took a little bit longer for us to get started. But if you fast forward to today, those buildings are still 100% African-American owned by our group, and we have 6 tenants in those buildings that are all African-American owned businesses. And so that is because of the intentionality and what you wrote into the RFP requesting that. And then when you go around the rest of what is now Paradise Valley, paying tribute to historic Paradise Valley, you've got Rainey Hamilton, who was here earlier today, who had been paying rent in his building for 25 or 26 years, that is buying his building. You have Hiram Jackson and Real Times Media, parent to the Michigan Chronicle, acquired a building, and their headquarters is there now for their national African-American-owned media company. And so if you look at what Capitol Park is today, Paradise Valley will be that plus in 3 or 4 years, and that was all due to your intentionality.
And you should talk about the park, because there's a park in the center of it.
That's right.
And we put a conservation easement and had the businesses in the area program the park, so we could get activities that recognize the heritage. And so the city's not running the park.
So much like, I mean, the Campus Martius Park and the Detroit 300 and the Conservancy, all falling under DDP, did an excellent job at Campus Martius, Cadillac Square, and other parks around downtown Detroit. So what we as property owners did was to start a nonprofit conservancy modeled after what had been done in Campus Martius Park, such that we are responsible for the beautification, the maintenance, and the programming, which is probably the most important, of the park and the surrounding public space, such that we can ensure that there's inclusive programming for all Detroiters to come down and experience that park. So that's a very important component of what we're doing there. Let's talk about recent wins. You and I talked the other day, and I can't remember, it's a software company or something with 500 jobs. You've had a number of wins recently for folks coming into the city, coming downtown, which for someone who has a restaurant downtown, I like to hear it.
Yeah. You know, Major L, this is one of the most fascinating of all. When I started, people said to me, okay, Detroit, there's like economic development plan books sitting in the mayor's office. Detroit should come back as a biosciences center. I was at the DMC. There's nothing Detroit had to compete with Boston on biosciences. The idea that we were going to hang out a sign saying biosciences center and companies are going to come here. We were going to be a tech center. That's where the future is. Well, what did Detroit have to offer versus Silicon Valley? And so I made a very clear strategy to say, our base is manufacturing. I'm going to start with General Motors. I'm going to start with Ford. I'm going to start with then FCA, now Stellantis, and really successfully got not only their manufacturing plants, but Bill Ford to bring the design of the electric and automated vehicles down to the train station to get lots of parts plants. And of course, cars are becoming more and more every year computers on wheels. And so a lot of the tech-related companies started to come. But there was a company called Majorel. We're getting these national competitions. I didn't pay any attention to this one because I thought it was so far-fetched. And what Majorel does is basically the interface between you and Facebook, Instagram, and the like. They monitor content, et cetera. And this is really odd for a social media company. Their quality standards are so high, you have to work on site, full-time. Now imagine this. The people handling Facebook and Instagram require you to be on site. So they wanted to place 500 employees on site, could be anywhere in America. We came down to the final 3. I joined the pitch, but I didn't really put a lot of energy into it. And they picked us. And so I brought them in. I had to say, I'm a little surprised. You could have gone to San Francisco, you could have gone to Chicago. And they said, Detroit is becoming a place where you can come. The people that we want to recruit, they want to live in and around downtown Detroit. Right. The housing here is affordable. The traffic isn't bad. The amenities in downtown are phenomenal. And with the downsizing of everybody's rent, Sandy Brewer's here, one of the people who downsized, you've made the rent attractive. And so now we're winning pure tech competition for 500 employee companies. And that's why there's a lot of folks anxious about what's going to happen with the downsizing. It's not like Stephen Ross doesn't know what he's doing when it comes to building offices. Right. Why is he building all this space? Because he believes when you add the University of Michigan grad school down the street, that Detroit is going to be a very desirable place for national and international companies to have corporate headquarters. And so this is where we're going. We're winning competitions we wouldn't have even thought of entering 5 years ago.
How important is it for you to have, as a bragging right, we've had obviously Dan over the past dozen or so years and his investment, which is notable and recognized around the country, but to have Stephen Ross come in town and partner with another, heritage family, the Illages, how does that help you when you're going out and trying to attract others as you move around the country? How Dan Gilbert came down and saw all these empty buildings and saw opportunities is visionary beyond anything I can comprehend. Now, when you start to talk about the construction costs of high rises, now you're talking about numbers that nobody could have believed. But Stephen Ross has every Fortune 500 company in his Rolodex. They're his tenants in Hudson Yards or Manhattan. There is tenants in Chicago. There is tenants down in Florida. And the number of times he'll call me and say, so-and-so from this national company is going to come on over and sit and talk. You now have somebody who, well, he was originally from here, a major national real estate player who says, I'm coming to Detroit. Mm-hmm. Let me show you the value proposition. Let me show you what it costs to be here. Let me show you got the only place where you can walk in a downtown area and see all 4 professional sports teams, where you've got theaters and riverfronts and entertainment. And it's just unbelievable. I don't want to share them here, but the people he gets on the cell phone. Stephen doesn't text. He still dials like his generation did. The people who answer the phone are amazing. And so it's great. And what he has done with the University of Michigan and Santa Ono has been just a tremendous boost
he's a complete believer in the Detroit project. But Stephen's point is this. When we pitched the Amazon second headquarters, we didn't begin to make a cut, but you look at where they went to a location in DC that had access to high-end grad school engineers, software technicians, finance folks. Amazon wanted to go where the top students in the country were being produced. Stephen says, there's no finer university in the country than the University of Michigan. We're a little biased on that. He says, what if you built a world-class grad school in downtown Detroit? And the people doing the future of mobility, the future of finance, the future of technology were coming out of school, and he's got that old building that he's turning into the incubator space. And what if we funded them like Silicon Valley does, is startups right out of school? How many companies will make 10 and 20-year strategy decisions to put their headquarters in Detroit because they know they have a 10 or 20-year supply of talent coming out of that grad school? So he put this together, and U of M is going to break ground before the end of this year on what is going to be an extraordinary school. And Stephen believes it's going to jumpstart the corporate headquarters moves into those office buildings. And I think most big players in the country think he knows a little bit about it.
How important is it? We talked a few times. You obviously have had options to do things outside of the office that you presently occupy, but you decided, particularly when President Biden was elected, that it made more sense at this time where you have a Democratic governor, Democrat in the White House, and at the time in the Senate and the House. How important has that political alignment been for you to be able to do what you're doing development-wise and investment-wise in the city?
I've talked about this so many times, but up until the election in 2020, in the last 50 years, a mayor of Detroit had an opportunity to work with a Democratic president and a Democratic governor at the same time. In 50 years, it was 2 years. And it was the year Jennifer Granholm was governor and Barack Obama was president. That was a period where Kwame Kilpatrick was being removed from office. Your father never had a chance. And so I look at the number of things that I got done by getting Republicans and Democrats to work together and thought, what would ever happen if we were aligned all the way? And then to have somebody who, as close a relation with Joe Biden and Gretchen Whitmer, both personal friends outside of business. It's been amazing what we're able to get done. And we got $800 million in American Rescue Plan money, and we've got, the things that we are building, because now I don't have to go through a bureaucracy. I can make a phone call and say, look, you've got this policy here, and it's really dumb. It's hurting us this way. Normally, you'd have to go through 4 levels of bureaucracy. Now they get pissed off and they fix it. And stuff gets moving, and everybody within the Biden administration, the Whitmer administration, knows that if they'll partner up with us, they'll be proud of what happens. And that's a big part of it. It's not enough to have Democrats with you. You've got to have partners who believe that when they sign up with us, they'll be proud of the result.
We've got, a minute and a half left. You've got an audience with entrepreneurs, policymakers, business owners, corporate leaders. What else is on your wish list? What would you like to see more of from us?
We are going to beautify this city. I am obsessed every day, right? So you got to hear Antoine Bryant. Isn't he amazing? So he said, I don't want to look at Hart Plaza and see any more damn concrete. I want something at Hart Plaza that's beautiful. The Joe Louis Greenway, which was nothing but an abandoned railway right-of-way filled with tires, is now the most spectacular walkway and parkway, and we're extending it a couple of miles a year, and you go talk to the neighbors there who thought their neighborhood was in a part of Detroit probably most of you have never been, and they thought was forgotten. They can't believe they're getting millions of dollars in investment. Now their kids can go play in the most beautiful park. There is so damn much garbage in the city since COVID, but now Ron Brundage, a great DPW director, has doubled the number of vehicles that just go out and pick up debris and haul them away. And you're going to see, as we are now, I think, 15 months away from the NFL draft and 500,000 people coming here, you're going to see a beautification of the city over the next 15 months. I think you'll be really proud of, so that when the world comes here, they say, I never thought this was Detroit.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you for your time. We appreciate you being the closing session. Thank you all for your attendance.